Well, after 4 years, nearly 4 years in Colombia, South America as Peace Corps volunteer, we'd been away during a critical time in U.S. history. The country was boiling over post-Vietnam War. And Betty's father, who's an educator in Chicago, came to visit us, as he did many times, as they had lived there for years before. Said, "You guys, you just got to get home. It's easy to stay here. It's such a beautiful place, but you got to get home." We didn't know really where home would be. St. Louis, Chicago, or New York, we kind of thought. So we bought our VW in Panama, drove it home, took 2.5 months, and explored every one of the countries, including Mexico. And we got to Philadelphia only after having had some correspondence with a doctor in Philadelphia, right here, Dr. Leopold at the West Philadelphia Community Mental Health Consortium. And he hired us both on the spot. But before that, Betty and I did interview in Washington, D.C. We came to Philadelphia to interview at Drexel and for their business school. And after I did the test, the profile, the guy said, "Did you intentionally sabotage this interview? Because you're exactly not the person that should be in an MBA program anywhere." So we liked Philly. We came for that reason. That's where we met Dr. Leopold. And we lived in southwest Philadelphia on 49th Street. And at night I drove out to Temple to take evening courses in psychology, as we had both found employment in mental health, community mental health. It was great. But for 2 years I sat in an office doing therapy, group therapy, kind of a group therapy leader. And I could always hear the hammering and the sawing going on outside. And I knew this was not going to last long. I think maybe 2 years I lasted in a 9-to-5 job, and that was it. My first and last 9-to-5 job. And I scouted around when I drove through Powelton, which was a natural way to get to Temple at night. And I always loved the Victorian houses, the big windows at night, particularly with the shutters, and the ornament, particularly the Matskin house at 35th and Bering. And I just, as I had worked on a house like that, like all of these in Chicago with Betty's father for a year before the Peace Corps, by golly, I came through on a Saturday to go to a morning class, and sure enough, it was Know Your FBI Day on the streets of Powelton, mainly Hamilton Street. And I think we were both rather fascinated by the openness of it and the daring of the whole thing, with photos of Know Your FBI, the agents who were plain-covered cops and agents trying to find out in Powelton where the activists lived, and to try to find some of the documents that were stolen from the it was the draft board and draft kind of documentation. They did not succeed. But so after 2 years behind a desk, I bought my first house, $15,000 house up on Bering Street, full of drug addicts. I think 4 of the 5 apartments were somehow drug-related, and it had chicken wire on all the windows of the first floor. The side porch had fallen off the thing. It was just like a ladder going up to the back door. The front porch was falling away from the house. The bottom fell out of a beautiful copper-covered bay window, and 2 days before settlement, there it was laying on the sidewalk. And I talked to George Funderburg at the time, and he said, "Well, do you want this house or not? Because if you don't move on it, you're not going to have a shot at it." So he did drop the price $1,000, and we took the cladding off the copper bay, put a new floor in it, new plumbing. That was just the beginning of our first real experience in Powelton, but we loved it. It was a time when there was stuff in the streets. Well, now that we're in Powelton Village and we own our house, we got to know people quickly. there were a lot of carpenters, a lot of artists in the neighborhood, and so a lot of people who were happy to work on my house with me, which we did for 2 years. And you just kind of know what's happening. You know who does what best, and they're all kind of artists, musicians, like myself, an anthropologist, who actually saw it as perfectly fitted with my carpentry. I always saw an interesting meshing of the two professions, but it just seemed right. Back in those days, were the big stuffed chairs on the front porches, the co-op. There was the Resistance Center. There was all these groups of people who were working for a better society. So we kind of felt at home. And so that went very, very well. So for 2 years, but it only took 2 years to finish that house. And I don't know if we both got antsy or what, but we rented one of our apartments to Mary Day Kent, who was working for the American Friends Service Committee. And she said, when she moved in, we talked, and she says, yes, and we're looking for two people, a couple, to direct this project in Mexico and Guatemala. There's two opportunities. She said, why don't you guys come down to the Quakers Center and let's talk about it? Well, as they presented it, it was perfect. It was just like a perfect match for what we had done previously in Colombia. The language was, we needed Spanish to learn the Indian language in Mexico, which was owed to me. And sure enough, we got far enough on the house. We had John Taylor, who became a next-door neighbor, and his wife, Marilyn, ran that house. And my father-in-law, he bought the other half of our house, so they managed the two. And it really was a godsend because we were able to come back and integrate right back into the neighborhood. And by that time, we knew we had to be in. We were so glad to have Powelton. It was sort of like we left. We had a place to return to our stuff, my tools. It was an easy choice coming back after those. It ended to be 3 years in Mexico. Great project, community development. So there's like something beginning here. You know, we get married. First thing we do is go away for three years to Mexico, Colombia, where we were volunteers and later managers of an emerald mine for a year. The money from which we were able to buy our house in Philadelphia. And even after 2 years, we started getting antsy again, and so we took that assignment in Mexico. An international project, or I should say a project of international in a sense that there were volunteers from Europe, from South America, from Mexico, from the United States. And so we were the head of a group of about 10 volunteers who lived on this isolated, no road coming in, no electricity. We lived there for 3.5 years and did a project that was designed by a Mexican anthropologist who, as a young man, he lived in a village where the Quakers used to do a summer project. And he loved it. He thought it brought people together so beautifully. The young people, the older people, they played guitars and they played basketball and they worked on a basketball court and they had gardens. He thought it was the perfect way for outsiders to integrate, not integrate completely, but to attempt to integrate into the indigenous community and be there for a short period of time. This project was for like 4 years. It was designed for 6 years. We were there for 3. So we took the assignment, and we took it because we met him, spoke to him about this program that he designed. He went to Berkeley, he got his PhD in anthropology, and he always had the vision of doing this cultural exchange and with young people. We were very young at the time. We were like 30 years old, 28 years old. And all the volunteers were about our age. It was a great project. Fruit tree project, rabbit project. We grew clover, pears, apples, anything that might make it at 9,500 feet. And we lived in a stone, what was an abandoned schoolhouse. The boys' dormitory had a couple bunks. The girls had the old jailhouse, and we opened a window in there. So there were like 8 of us to start with, and we had a partition of a little corner. But what an experience! It was like the end of the world. No running water in the buildings, and it was hard, but boy, it was great.
So Bill, what year was you and Betty's second arrival in Powelton, and what was the situation?
So we finished that project, and in Mexico, came back home with a hell of a lot of energy, and that's the other thing. When you step away from it, when you step away from this country, and you come back, we always came back with things always looked better. Things always look cleaner. Things always like more opportunity. We love coming back, and went back to our house, and I put together a small crew of workers, and we local guys, and I ended up buying another place up on Lancaster Avenue, a wonderful commercial place. But by then I had hired a Romanian, and I had a Salvadoran, 2 Salvadorans, and a Mexican. They brought skills to every job. Restoration, they could do stone restoration, plastering. They worked with me doing outside carpentry, slate work, copper work, you name it. It was how we did it, house by house. Got the gallery, which is now a gallery on Lancaster Avenue, and I don't know. We never had much money to work with, but we made the building that we had. We finished it with a limited budget. And because things were so inexpensive, I missed one. The house we're living in right now. The lady next door, an old-time Poweltonite, called me one day. She says, Bill, there's a lot of hanging out going on in the house next door. The front door is knocked down. The front porch is long collapsed. But we saw lights and what seemed to be even, not fire, but there's something going on over there. Would you go check? And I came in this house on a Sunday morning. The front door was laying in the hallway. I walked right in. The plaster was all over. The first floor plaster had collapsed because the radiators broke. And a rather eccentric professor from Penn, he was a homosexual man who was very open about it. You could see him in women's clothes on certain days. And the mailman, this is typically Powelton, used to say, well, now you never knew when you went to the house to deliver the mail what outfit he was going to come in. Dr. Bishop. Wonderful man. But what happened is he died, and there were no heirs, and nobody wanted this house. It fell apart so fast when the radiators broke and the water ran through the house, the floors buckled, the plaster came down. I walked in the front door that Sunday, and I just turned around and I saw the stairwell which was tight and beautiful, almost like a circular stair. Every window and doorway, it was plumb. The stairs were sound. I thought, my God, what a great, potentially great house. But it was dark because of all the north orientation. We solved that by doing a lot of lighting in it, but that became the next 1-year project. And we finished that, and did we get antsy? Oh, no, yeah, that's when we started getting solicitations to go to Central America for short periods, like 1 month of service. That was during the war, mainly with the refugees living in these sprawling camps, just in many cases just miles from not miles, tens of miles from the conflict. And the United Nations notion was that with a presence, an international presence, they were safer. And it was true. It was a bit frightening. And we went many times. I would go for a month, come home, take care of our son. We had a kid by that time. And Betty would go. She'd go for a month. She'd come back and I'd go for a month. We did that alternated for about 8 months. I went 4 times. So that was that.
What year was that?
Well, Emil was born It was about 1980. We're up to about 1980, 82 now. Because Eamon was born in 76 and he was, oh no, he was younger. Would be about 1978. 76, 78, 78 to 80, yeah. That gets us to a certain point there. Let me think. We came back from there. Yes, of course. You come back to the old story, you come back with lots of energy and optimism. And the neighborhood at that time just seemed to be getting better and better. And so we looked at a place on Lancaster Avenue because I wanted to do something with a commercial space. So we got another wonderful building for very little money because nobody wanted it. It was in terrible shape. Developed that one. And how did it go there? Oh, what made that interesting is Lancaster Avenue. I loved the vibe at that time, and even now when I'm up there. Just the kids coming out of the school and doing something with art up there. And I remember one of the tenants we had up there was a very famous artist, Robinson Friedenthal. And when we went away, he moved in, when we went away the next time, he moved into the gallery. But there was always this clunk, clunk of the trolley and the kids looking in the window and looking at his maquettes of his sculptures, and he would engage with them. And I thought that was just fantastic. So when we had exhibitions, I too, when I was on duty, tried to attempt to draw people in who normally don't bring their kids into a gallery. They're waiting at the bus stop. You got to invite them. You know, it's museums and things like that for the black community of Mantua, which is right there. There was no history of it. So that was exciting. I enjoyed that part a lot. And wouldn't you know, at that time, we finished another project. It took 3-4 years. We talked to the Mennonites. That's right, because in Central America, when we were working in the refugee camps, I was always astounded by these Mennonites, Quaker volunteers, but particularly the Mennonite volunteers who were volunteers working in a war zone, thousands of people arriving all the time, and they were attempting to build wood structures with a wooden floor to get them out of these tents where they were living, because this is for the long haul. These camps were occupied for years at a time. But I saw how the Mennonites just stuck their nose to their work. They didn't get involved with challenging the military or getting on the trucks so much with the refugees when they would move them from one camp to the other, because they needed the presence of the volunteers on those cattle trucks. And they were stopped, and otherwise people were pulled off those buses and killed. They disappeared all the time. So the solution was the UN invited us. We accepted their invitation and to do this on and off. So we finished that. Oh boy, what? I'm trying to remember. We came and went. The pattern of our life since marriage, starting with overseas duty of 3 years, come back for 3 years, buy a house, leave for 3 more years, come back, buy another house, fix it up, leave again. Well, the last time was the Mennonites, the same Mennonites. I got to know a couple of them when we came back. That's right, when we came back from Central America and we came back from those assignments. We went up to Akron, Pennsylvania to meet some of the directors of these projects. Sure enough, they had a project in Africa, and it was to attempt to coordinate producer groups in 5 African countries: Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Sudan. Pretty nice job. And we just jumped at it. So we worked for nearly 4 years in Africa, helping groups who already identify as a production unit, who have some of the intentions of the Quakers of fair pay, that people benefit from their production. And so the Quakers had a hand in setting up some of these groups, but now it needed to be coordinated, and they needed help with the consolidation of their production and getting it out of the country, because we knew that what held back people in, whether the assignment was Colombia, Mexico, or Africa, the problem was they had no mechanism for purchasing their production and getting it to a distant point like the capital where it could be exported. So that's what we worked on, helping them in their own groups, whether it was wood carvers, basket weavers, jewelry makers, so that we can consolidate their production with several other projects in East Africa. So we worked with European nonprofits who also were exporting to the United States. That was a great project. That lasted 4 years. Came back, and what can I say? Every time we came back, I seemed to get myself in a little bit of trouble because there was so much demolition going on. There was a lapse in there, or a period, not a lapse. It's a lapse in that if our ultimate goal was to be working abroad all the time, that wasn't the goal. But we found that it worked for us. Being a volunteer abroad, I love doing volunteer work. Year-wise, boy, I'm not good on dates. I didn't even know my own birthday. Oh, we went to Africa in 90. 90? No. Late 90s. 91. And came back in 95. Oh, there was 4 years in there. It was another one of these. After 3 to 4 years, we just started getting antsy. We did other short-term assignments too, not 3 and 4 years in that time, but Betty would go to the border in Mexico and work with the maquiladora, the women in these plants, these production plants along the U.S.-Mexican border, organizing. We went back to Africa 3 times in that post-Africa time. But between assignments before Africa, we pretty much stayed in Philadelphia. She would go on to the border, but I stayed home taking care of our son. We did that a lot, where I just sort of took over everything for a month when she was away, or 2 months, month and a half. So that's it. I mean, yeah, I think the notion that for us to live fully, we needed to step back from it. It was overwhelming, the work. I remember working 7 days a week. We worked and saved so that we had something to fall back on when we left again. But I had a very reliable crew that I worked with, that I could just literally turn my tools, even my vehicle, my truck at the time, to a friend. And the trick is finding someone who can manage the real estate, because everyone said, once you start buying a house or houses, it's like running a restaurant. You're stuck. You can't really just turn it over to somebody. Well, we did it, and we succeeded at doing it 4 times. But that's not to say that it would work for everyone. You really got to find the right person. We always found a Poweltonian who wanted to live in a big old house rather than a small apartment or a big apartment. Marilyn Taylor, she did it for us twice. Suzanne Wheeling, who lived just in West Philadelphia, did it for us. So we always found someone. You pay people well, give them a percentage of every rental that they sign, plus a monthly salary, and you can find people. You got to reward them. We always tried to get them to live in one of our houses, though, so that they could tend to things. Powelton was full of it. It continues to have a lot of resources of skilled people. Now it's becoming a little more professional, architects, planners, but there's still an abundance of of carpenters, people who buy houses. There's this whole list of resources that you can tap. So it worked, but it might be.
I know.
In the summer, I would have doctors. I got to know people and working on, and I hired doctors, a young medical student, not doctors yet. I remember one of the most rewarding experiences was like Fred. He was going to just quit, and in the mental health center, I said, Fred, why don't you just? I'm going to leave this thing. I'm going to buy a house, and why don't you work with me? He came and he worked a year and he loved it. So much so that he went back to medical school. I think you got to step back from something once in a while, get another perspective, and do something that you can see the results of. I've trained a lot of people, Salvadorians, Mexicans, young people that I went to court to bat for them and hired them for a year. And if they worked out, their probation was ended. Older guys who were there in prison, the wife came to me and said, could we work? Hired him, it worked out. Right now I have up till a year ago, I had a very colorful crew, which I had for 7 years, and they were musicians and what's the other one? Poetry reading, and a clown. And they had a band, and two of those guys were still on my crew this summer. And it seems to be artists want to work intensively on their project, and they also want to earn some money. And so I paid cash. I lived in a cash world then. Everything was, if you wanted me, they got prices. I could beat anybody's price, but I paid all of my workers in cash. And it worked. We didn't get terribly rich at it. It was through hard work, I guess, that we got ahead. But the work crews that I put together I had a deaf mute working for me for nearly 3 years, neighbor right down the street. He would be down below on the ground where the scaffold was, and he would tie things on and hoist them up. But I always had access to skilled people. They were skilled artists, trained artists in many cases, or technicians. They just wanted to step back from the profession, not quit it. So, but I remember too the criticism from one of the professor at Drexel University in library science, and he lived across the street, and he used to always say to me, he said, when do you think you might really start using all that education you have, a degree in master degree in political science and anthropology and world experience, and you come back here and you're a grunt. He never saw or never experienced the satisfaction that I felt plastering, working on wood, working with wood, masonry of any kind. I just loved it, but I couldn't keep it going year after year after year. That's when we would step back, and we always stepped right back into it. Oh, God. One of the problems or the criticisms is that I move very quickly. Up and down a ladder or scaffold, walking on these little parapets around these Victorian houses, doing slate work, copper work. I fell off the tailor's house doing just that, up on the roof, right at roof level, and fell 35 feet into their front yard on top of the garbage cans and walked away. I worked on my own house, and walking backwards on the roof, I fell through a skylight and went down to the second floor. Ladders leaning against the house. A gust of wind came up, knocked my ladder down, and I remember falling in the front yard and landed like a damn squirrel. And the UPS guy was delivering. I fell almost in front of it, but I landed in the soft grass and continued working. I cut my fingers, tips of my fingers off. Yes, there's a price to pay for working intensely and quickly. I think of myself as a very efficient worker, or I was. I still do things, but I'm not efficient. Yeah, but I just, it never entered my mind that I was going to die. I just always felt I would walk away from this stuff. Yeah, I mean, when my friends would encourage me to slow down, and I didn't know how else to work. Simply, there was just seemed to be, and there's so much to do, and there's so many projects to do, and I would get 4 or 5 things going at once, and I could do that then. I was young. The people who worked for me were young. Well, yeah, I've always been, as one of my friends called me, you're a very acquisitive type. I scavenge in old buildings and have gone to jail for it in Washington, D.C., in St. Louis, and in Philadelphia, but always got out of it because I wasn't selling anything. I kind of thought of it. I did it with my father-in-law in Chicago. And he had all these wonderful papers as a professor that he looked like official documents that would allow him to do that. Well, hell, I had no such entree. And I did get stopped, up by Temple particularly. And I always seemed to be able to explain my way out of it to the police, except one time when they were ripping down a whole block of Center City. Not the center city, but more close to the expressway. And we were in a barber shop. It was going to come down because the demolition was two buildings down. And I went in there. A friend called me and said, "You know, Bill, you can't believe what's happening down on, I guess it was 7th Street." And I got on my bike and went down there. And sure enough, that building was going to come down in 2 days, and they had already put plywood on the door. So a friend and I went down there on our bikes, and I had a bag with tools, and we kind of pried the front door of the barber shop, and for hours we worked. The most beautiful marble cases, mirrors, barber chairs. Everything was there from 100 years ago, 95 years ago. And we got caught. And I hid in the basement for overnight. And when I came out it wasn't the next day, it was like 3 a.m. And I thought it was safe to come out, and they nailed me. And I resisted. Because they had work clothes and what do you call them, ski hats on. I thought, oh, we're in somebody's. So I resisted. Well, I shouldn't have resisted because it was cops that were hired by Frank Rizzo, who was the mayor then. And so I got caught. I got charged with felony entrance, resisting arrest. Went to jail, sat in a roundhouse till they could have a hearing. At the hearing, I was, of course, released. A judge came in when we had, I guess was it a trial yet? No. It was more of a hearing, and I'll never forget, it was Judge Lisa Rochette. My friend was headed off to law school. That was his plan for the next fall. And I was a returned Peace Corps volunteer, and I had worked with the Mennonites, and I worked with the Quakers, and she says to me, "Are you a missionary?" I said, "Well, no, I don't proselytize, but I work with missionary groups." She dismissed the case. She says, "There's no basis here for felonious behavior." So I've been lucky, but I've always integrated, whether it's a mantle, baseboard, trim, mirror, into some house that I'm working on, and nothing was ever spoiled or really sold at a major profit of any kind. So I enjoyed that aspect of it. Felt like I was saving something, and I think it had something to do with my acquisitiveness. Once they're in your life, like the likes of John Taylor or Joe Revlock or Lawrence Salzman, they're like these resources in this neighborhood, and they embody history too. Julie Oshana, when she was alive, Maggie Funderburg, those are the people we just gravitated towards, and they're the ones that we met early on, and encouraged us to buy a house in Powelton. And I must say, it was on my, just driving through the neighborhood. And I said earlier, having worked on an 1870s Victorian in Chicago for a year with Betty's father, who's an architect, I learned a lot. And I just felt like I could do anything back then. And I love that aspect of my life, that I'm my boss. And my feeling of self-worth is based on what I've accomplished, what I got done. And so Powelton was full of people who I would say just nudged me on, supported, and that's a big part of it. The people who were here, people from the 60s and 70s that had this kind of Quaker attitude, as they say, attitude. It was very welcoming for us. In fact, that is probably why we sought out the Quakers when we and the Mennonites when we started our assignments. We met members of their congregations and organizations here in Powelton, so you knew it had to be a good group.
But now, of course, there was another, shall we call, side of Powelton, which was people who hung out in the piles and
Yes.
a lot of dope and whatever people we
Yes.
call hippies. What about that side of Powelton?
Oh, that was very exciting too, by the way. Just this mix of humanity who were sleeping in living in vacated houses. There was so much abandonment. I remember so clearly on Bering Street. I could pick 4 houses at the time. Any one that was in a range that I could have bought. Same way with Lancaster Avenue. There was vacancy all around me, but the spirit nonetheless was there. You know that you were part of something bigger, and that kind of keeps you going. Just knowing that it's a forward-looking community. Oh, I think so. Oh, in hippie ideas, an alternative way of doing just about everything. From do I get a building permit or not? These are all things that I think I was in business here for 48 years. The only building permit I ever got was to do my own property because it was going to have public access. The East Africa Center. There I had the handicap access, the width of the stair, the thickness of the plaster, all these things, the lighting, So that was the other thing. People looked for a different way of doing things. And even though they couldn't afford expensive restorations, we cobbled these old houses together so that they were perfectly fine, and affordable. We were affordable. That was a big part of it. And with spending so much time abroad as a volunteer even, we just didn't need much to live. We just didn't require much. So it never felt like we were out of step, if you will, or that we had to use conventional means to finance it, because we helped each other out. $5,000 here, $1,000 there. People came forward when I needed money. It happened right here in Powelton with people that I knew, having worked with them. So there is that simple attraction. There were real people, there were students, but early on, Powelton was full of older foreign students too, graduate students who could live on a dime. The house that I bought was in terrible shape, but people were paying $55, $60 a month rent. They stayed in these places forever, and they weren't demanding. You didn't have to have all these special hookups and washer dryers and garbage disposals and they really didn't want it. Just they appreciated tall ceilings, a little bit of plaster ornament, some tall windows, a hardwood floor, shutters, beautiful door. There was that appreciation, and I think it drew a lot of people here, and it had old owners who weren't gouging people at all. That you could feel it in the air, and you could just feel it talking to people who managed to live here, earning very, very little money. It was a real alternative. So, yeah, it has obviously changed. It has become much, much, much more of an outside investment situation. The missing teeth, if you will, the vacant lots, are all being filled, and most of those happened in the 70s and the 80s, and even up till about the early 90s. The demolition. The houses were so bad that they were being demolished by the city. Now it's a case of developers demolishing and building new. But there was no new building in Powelton in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You just didn't see it. A vacant lot remained a vacant lot, or a garden. And that appealed to us too. So we weren't so upset about I think of it as the missing teeth, a block of great old houses with two big holes in it. Those sort of things didn't weigh on us very much back then, and so it was opportunity. Yeah, and we had our own co-op. We used to have food delivery, fresh fish, bread delivery. There were all these wonderful amenities. You had to volunteer time there, but there were these commercial ventures that really served people. And it was always community people running it, from a bakery to the co-op to services. I remember when we first bought here, people wouldn't even come. Outsiders wouldn't. I'm not exaggerating this. They did not want to come to Powelton Village. The students who lived here, they never complained to the Drexel about the conditions, because it was all they could afford, and they were just happy to have it back then. So the kind of the profile of the people has really changed too. The students are wealthy students now, whereas they were kind of more commuter kids before, and they were poorer Fordham students, living 3 to 4 to a small apartment. But the profile of the people here has changed a lot. But the advantage is there's people. There's students, there are people on the streets now, in front of our house, 33rd Street, going back and forth to Mantua, living in Mantua. Well, it was unheard of back then. Beyond Spring Garden Street, no white student would live up there, much less a family. Now, there's a lot of vacancy from kids who were born and raised in Mantua, moved out, and there's empty nesters who rent rooms to students. And I love to see it. I love to see those foreign students, of course, but also, middle class white young men and women going up and down the street in front of our house all the time. That is wonderful. It adds to the density, but it has much more of a true urban feeling. I appreciate that a lot. I mean, I know Drexel, it does seem to be land hungry and want to control things, but some good has really come of it. I think these are the kind of things you see when you leave Powelton for a period of time, and it's not a week, 2, or a month, but if you leave for a couple of years and come back, you see incredible changes. It breaks the kind of stereotypical notion we had back then, or people had back then, that it's never really going to prosper. Well, quite the contrary. It has prospered immensely. Our house, which all of our properties were bought in the $15,000 range, now they're worth 10, 20 times that. It's astounding. and what makes it possible to still have very reasonable rents, $520 rents in our buildings for a small one bedroom or small apartment, is we bought them inexpensively. We didn't have many outstanding loans, and we worked on them ourselves. So it's been piecemeal. Like my friend, my neighbor Joe Revlog, he still labors away at detailed improvements to his house, and because it's by he himself, it's at his pace, and that's like it or not, that's what makes him such a strong advocate of Powelton Village. He's people aren't bugging him. I mean, he's able to just do it at his own pace. I really liked that. There was a Quaker family up on Bering Street. He was an architect and carpenter. Oh my gosh, when you start thinking about it, the plasterers, the carpenters, anybody dealing in masonry, cement, and brickwork, they were black contractors. And when I think back about it, whenever I was turning to someone to help me with a plumbing, electrical, it was a black man. And they're here. They were always here. Back then, there were so few of us really working on houses. There were like maybe half a dozen of us. We shared every little bit of information, and you hired someone who worked well for your neighbor. It just, everything was word of mouth. I was in business here for 50 some years. I never had a card. My name never appeared on my truck. It was like if people wanted an invoice, I'd say, well, make up an invoice for me. Call me whatever you want. That's fine. It's the informality. I think the informal sector, it was a very informal approach to things. It's in Latin America, in Mexico, Africa, the informal sector, whether it's manufacturing, any kind of construction, that's where we always put our energy, in that thriving mass of humanity who are just cobbling things together with other people's materials. You know what I mean? Stuff that they acquire. For instance, a project we had in Kenya, very successful, I think, was there were these young street boys who they just needed anything to do. They, with a little bit of skill, with a hammer and a pair of pliers and a tin snip, they could make things. They could make little boxes, trunks, kitchen products. We were able to get the raw material from a bottling plant, and bottles, caps, and labels are put on big sheets and then cut out. But a lot of those are misprints, and they work beautifully for fabricating these trunks, and the students, when they go away to school, take a trunk with them. Every student has them in Kenya. And that was the informal sector, just groups of people working under a tree, literally. And their problem, as usual, was raw material. Where did they get the material? That's what we worked on all the time in Kenya, trying to help people source the materials they need to produce what they produce. That was the informal sector that was so alive in the third world. We saw it here in Powelton. And after our overseas experience, 2 of them, we realized that this was the place to be. If we're going to settle somewhere, it would be the perfect place to be. And in a big, beautiful Victorian, I guess that was sort of beyond my expectation. So, yeah. Well, just continuing with the notion of you never know what you're going to find. I did a lot of volunteer work while here in Powelton. I knew teachers who were teaching up in North Philadelphia and in other places, and the mirror I have in my living room right now, and I brought the mate to it. I put it on the top of my Volkswagen and took it down to Virginia and put it in my father-in-law's house. But we used to work with Habitat for Humanity and with the church. The church is still doing work up in North Philly, and they were doing simple restorations. But restoration, it means for them lowering the 10, 11, 12-foot ceilings. And this beer was orphaned by that crazy idea that you put in aluminum track and panels, but the beer would no longer fit. So one of the projects we had in North Philadelphia, where they were walking me through the house, and a portion of the house was still in shambles. This mirror, along with its mate, this one was actually leaning against a wall in the front hall, and the other one was laying face down on the floor. But because it's quarter-inch plate glass mirror and it had a tongue and groove 3/4-inch board backing, it survived the fall. The pieces fell off by the hundreds. And boy, this room needed something. It had a mantle here that was nothing more than it wasn't an operating for wood burning, it was just for a vent to bring hot air into the house earlier. It just needed to go. And this was, for me, it seemed so logical, and it fit perfectly. I restored it, glued the portions back on. I didn't gold leaf it, but I did get gold paint and did touch up where I glued pieces, hundreds of pieces on. But there it was, and I was going to volunteer my time there. And the parish priest, I saw the mirrors, one laying on the floor and the other leaning against the wall. And he says, "Yeah, we're going to have to get rid of these two." And I said, "Well, look, what you want for them, just let me know." And he said, "Well, just take them." I think I made a contribution to the church for $100 each. But it's that sort of thing. These treasures of walnut 6-panel doors and walnut and chestnut baseboard and trim, plaster rosettes, they were all in these houses. You just had to come up with a technique for removing the rosettes without destroying them, because they're plaster. So you got to take them down with the plaster lath and all, and then lay them in sand and go to work on them. But the mirror is an example of what sustained me in Powelton. It was so exciting. And the buildings, when Drexel was expanding, there was just a plethora of beautiful doors, blocks at a time. You know, that was always a dream. I mean, because I was around in all these assignments, so many beautiful things. I had in the back of my head that one day I was going to display these, show people, document them, and sell some of them. And I've always said that about Powelton, too. There were so many artists here living in warehouse spaces and half-abandoned houses. But sooner or later, those very same blocks, there were more people around, there was more activity around. They opened people's eyes to a dilapidated but a beautiful building, and they have an opportunity to do an impromptu show. They breathe life into a community. And so I must say, coming back, I know I had I wanted somehow to be involved in art exhibitions. We had exhibitions of neighbors' art, quite a few neighbors' art, my son's art every year, but really beautiful shows of some of the really good artists in our neighborhood. So that's also just something that has wedded us to Powelton. And now, although I'm not running the gallery as a gallery now, it is a gallery, but it's rented to an African-American couple, a mother and daughter, who are running a business in my old gallery. My son had a show there in December, and he always has work present on the walls. And it just, they're trying to get a hold on gallery art not just selling jewelry and stuff, in the neighborhood. And I rent that gallery to them at a reasonable price, just so that they help kickstart their business. So we benefit by association with art and artists.